One of my subscribers told me I should pay more attention to bronze coins and that I collect too much silver. And you know what? He has a point. There is a whole world of really cool bronze coins out there that I should feature more on this channel. I have been purchasing a few bronze coins here and there over the last 3 months, and I decided to clump them all together here and show them to you. We've got a few 2nd century AD Roman Imperial bronzes and a few Hellenistic Greek bronzes as well. Collecting bronzes has a few quirks. It can be a little bit tricky. I personally admit I have a bit of a phobia with bronze disease, particularly since the area where I live in has very high humidity, and humidity speeds up the chemical reactions of bronze disease. But in reality, it's more of a personal fear. It's just a few bronze coins here and there that have this problem. And of course I don't want to scare you away from collecting them, it's really a minority. This is actually an interesting opportunity to gauge the community's interest on bronze coins. Let me read in the comment section if you have any bronzes in your collection and if you ever had a problem with bronze disease. If I see that a lot of people have this issue, I'll maybe look for an expert on the topic for an episode. On the other hand, if you can stand the fact that these coins are chemically vulnerable, you might say, you have the benefit that base metal coins tended to be larger than precious metal pieces, and this allowed the die engravers to express more of their creativity. And some of the most beautiful coin art I have ever seen was on bronzes. You can find some large, pretty spectacular designs, even if these coins were supposed to be pocket change. On the other hand, going to another disadvantage, since these kinds of coins had mostly fiduciary value, that is, their value was dictated by law. This means their value was much higher than the intrinsic value contained in its metal. They were always spent first. They were spent before people would spend their precious metal coins. And that means a good number of bronze pieces that came to our days have circulated a lot. And consequently, they tend to be in a worse overall state of conservation. That's one of the counterintuitive things about ancient coins when you're starting out. You will see a lot of silver coins in better shape and cheaper than bronze coins. And the reason is simply because good-looking bronzes are much rarer. But anyways, enough talk. Let's look at some pretty coins, and maybe this video pushes you to giving bronzes a try. And we start in the very end of the 4th century BC, maybe the early 3rd century BC, with a posthumous coin struck in the name of Alexander the Great. I often recommend for those with an interest in Greek coinage who are looking for a pretty and historically significant first coin to look for one of the very abundant silver drachma, or in the case they have a little bit more cash to spare, the large tetradrachma of Alexander. Both denominations are very common and easy to find in retail or at auction, and the offer in regards to the variation in condition is also quite broad. There are worn ones in case you're in a tight budget, which still look quite decent, and you're also spoiled for choice if you want mint state examples. Although, of course, then, especially if we want a mint state tetradrachma, we're not talking about a cheap coin. These can easily go up in the 4 figures. But since this is a video on bronze coins, what we have here is a bronze unit, a fractional piece in Alexander's monetary system. You might find these around attributed simply as units, bronze units. We don't know exactly what denomination these were. There are some convincing theories that these are hemi-obols, because there's a number of silver obols that were made. Obols are scarce but not rare, and then there is also a very small number of silver hemi-obols. These ones are extremely rare, so it's likely that this is where most mints draw the line between striking their tiniest silver and their largest bronze denomination. So they started minting hemi-obols in bronze. They probably just preferred to strike the bronze hemi-obols because they were more practical. And of course, this way you can direct your silver to more important denominations. You needed 12 of these bronzes in exchange for 1 silver drachma. So it was a small amount of money, but considering 1 drachma was the daily wage for a lot of people, It wasn't an insignificant amount of money either. A couple of these could maybe pay you for a meal. On the obverse, we have the same design as the other Alexander pieces, the bust of the demigod Heracles, wearing the skin of the Nemean lion. This type is particularly useful if you want to study style varieties. Some portraits of Heracles look absolutely fantastic. Others, like this one, are maybe less inspired, but they're still quite good considering this was small change. We can clearly see all of his facial features, for example. We can see his face looking right. The little bit of soil adhered to this coin actually helps us make out some of the details, like his eye sockets, his jaw, and the outline of his head as well. And maybe if you just helping you out, the left part of the design, this more bulbous area, is where the thick skin of the lion sits over his head. Wonderful black patina. This coin was probably found somewhere with a particularly dry climate. That's where this type of jet black patina forms. Heading to the reverse, we have a unique design for these fractions. At the center, the name Alexandro. More than simply the name of Alexander, this was more like an appeal to his authority. So if you would translate it, it would be something more like Coin of Alexander or Issued under Alexander. It's funny because this is actually a posthumous coin, so this was made after Alexander's death. But people continued to lean on Alexander's authority for centuries after he was dead. People just kept issuing coins with his name. And the two objects above and below the name, these are some of the weapons Heracles used, so these designs are complementing what you saw on the obverse. So you have the club of Heracles, and his bow. The bow is inside the quiver where he stored the arrows. There's also a third mark above the club. This is a caduceus, or as the Greeks would call it, a kerykeion. This was the magical staff used by Hermes, the god of trade and commerce. There are lots of varieties and mint marks in this type of coin, and this particular one this mint mark can help us nail down this coin came from the mint of Tarsus. I've made a video on how to identify the coins of Alexander the Great, by the way, using its canonical catalog. I'll leave a link in the video description. It's a very powerful tool for Alexander the Great collectors, and it's free to use. Okay, let's keep going. Now let's head to Egypt. This is a wonderful and rather heavy hemidrachma of Ptolemy III. It weighs 38 grams. That's massive. And now, considering this is a hemidrachma, now I need to eventually grab a full drachma as well. Imagine 76 grams of bronze. It must feel quite imposing on hand. This particular coin was made in the capital of Alexandria in the mid to late reign of Ptolemy III. So this puts this coin chronologically somewhere between 235 and 222 BC. And as you can observe, the quality of this coin is outstanding. It's nice and round, the strike is even and well executed, it all looks very sharp. The 3rd century BC was a good time in Egypt. The Ptolemaic dynasty was doing relatively well, and the economy was going strong. Coins of Ptolemy III are surprisingly common, probably because large groups of these have turned up in hordes. Although it was a good time economically in Egypt, at this time there was a native Egyptian unrest against the ruling Greek minority, and any kind of revolt like that generally led people to hoard their possessions, their precious possessions and their coins. And that's actually how most of the coins survive to our days. They came from hoards. Now, let me comment about its manufacture, because this coin is really something. Now, how did they make such great-looking bronzes, the Ptolemies? Egyptian mints took a lot of care on manufacture. So, silver was very scarce in Egypt, and many denominations that would have been made out of silver in other kingdoms were made in bronze in Egypt. And I think the exceptional care in making these lower denominations coins might have been an effort on Ptolemy's part to convince people of using these bronze coins as money. The Greeks had a deeply rooted disdain for using non-precious metals as money. So let's look at the manufacture. The blank for these coins was most likely put on lathes, so the surfaces on both sides came out dead flat and the rims came out as round as possible. they would spin the coin and they would use some flat surfaces to flatten the surfaces of the coin. And of course, this helped the dice when it was time to strike the design on these flans. Imagine the strength of the hammer blow that was needed to imprint such a large design on such a large coin. So making the coin as flat and as even as possible would ensure that this strong hammer blow, all of that work that was put on striking the coin, that it would increase the chances of the coin being properly made. And the use of this rotating lathe explains these little dimples you see on both sides, right at the center of the coin. These are anchor points. The lathe must have had a couple of pins, one of each side of the coin, which held the blank steady while it spun on the lathe. Along the rim, you also sometimes catch a raised ridge line that hints either for the use of the lathe or this was a remnant from the casting process. This was probably a two-faced mold used in preparing the blanks. Another little quirk of these Egyptian coins is the asymmetry in the diameter of each side of the coin. So one face is slightly wider than the other. That shape makes sense if the blanks were maybe open cast. So you had to have like this narrower underside so the cooled blank could be lifted out of the mold easily. And then they would just spin it around and the coin would fall off. Basically, the point I want to make is that they put so much effort. The result of these coins is so precise, the weights cluster so tightly that I honestly suspect they used some kind of proto-machinery that was guiding all of this process. I mean, not fancy automation as we think of a factory, but the Alexandria Mint must absolutely have had some organized, repeatable process with the help of tools to make these coins, and they were probably ahead of their time. So, okay, after this rant on why I think this coin is an engineer marvel, let's actually understand what we have on each side of this coin. On the obverse, we meet Zeus Ammon, a mix of Greek and Egyptian deities. The Ptolemies, as any good Greek, they liked to present themselves as sanctioned by Zeus, the king of the gods who legitimized earthly rule. In making a nudge to the native Egyptian population, we have a representation of Ammon as well. Ammon in local Egyptian religion also represented a deity related to the idea of kingship. So an Ammon's sacred animal was the ram, and the ram has these like massive horns. So that's why we see the portrait of Zeus here wearing these curled horns. It's a straightforward way of unifying Zeus and Ammon in an easy way of telling both Greeks and native Egyptians that the Ptolemies were in charge. On the reverse, we have the traditional Ptolemaic formula of showing the eagle, the symbolic animal of Zeus, so once more reinforcing this idea of authority of the dynasty. You will see this eagle on the vast majority of Ptolemaic coins, but don't worry, you don't have to be bored with it. The bird's pose shifts a lot depending on the issue and the denomination. Sometimes it has its head turning left or right. The body can also be facing the same direction as its head or the other direction. The wings can be closed or open. Sometimes there are even two eagles. The different poses were probably used to help differentiate one denomination from the other. And here in this particular example, they have kept it simple. One eagle, a couple of control marks at the bottom, close to the eagle's leg, the cornucopia and a Cairo monogram, and around, at the outer edge, some very straightforward legends. Ptolemaio Basileus, of King Ptolemy. Wonderful coin. This coin is actually a strong candidate to my top 10 of 2025 video. Alright, let's keep going and let's jump a few centuries to the 1st century BC, between the years 85 and 65 BC. At this time, the Roman Republic was taking over all of the Hellenistic sphere of influence, and this cute little coin here comes from a very large issue of coins struck under probably the last Greek kingdom to truly offer some proper military resistance to Roman occupation. I'm talking about the kingdom of Pontus, under the king Mithridates VI. To pay his troops against the Romans, he issued these interesting brass coins. As you can see, it looks quite yellowish. This coin has been cleaned somewhat recently, I would guess, and we can see the yellow brass metal poking through this green patina. Brass was hard to produce in antiquity, so this metal was hard to counterfeit, and Mithridates used it to strike a very large number of coins. It could have been that, being a relatively small kingdom, Mithridates didn't have enough silver to pay for his campaigns. There are silver and gold coins attributed to him, of course, but they tend to be scarce. And to wage such a large war against such a massive enemy like Rome, he probably had to resort to fiduciary money like these, brass coins. They must have had an inflationary effect on his economy, but I guess when you are at war with Rome, you can just push these concerns under the rug and just issue as many coins as you need to pay for as many soldiers as you needed. So on the obverse we have this cute little bust of Dionysus, the Greek god of wine. Mithridates was one of those Greek kings who knew how to use propaganda on coins very well, and one of his key strategies was to reinforce the Hellenistic, the Greek identity of his subjects. So all of his coins show different Greek gods. Here we can make out it's Dionysus for the crown he wears on his head. It's made out of grape leaves, and there are cute little bundles of grapes on his crown as well. Of course, he was the god of wine after all, so he had to show some grapes here. On the reverse, we have some of the objects used in the cult of Dionysus. We have a small box, Cista Mystica. This was a wicker basket with a serpent inside of it, used in initiation rituals of his mystery cults. And over the basket, and to its right, we have the skin of the panther. The panther was the symbolic animal of Dionysus. And across the design, there's a rod that goes in diagonal through the image. This is a thyrsus. It's a staff made out of a plant typical of the Mediterranean area called the giant fennel. Under all of this design, another feature of this issue was the name of the issuing city that produced this coin. Mithridates at a point commanded most of Anatolia, and he issued coins in lots of different cities. Here we have the name of the city, Amissos, probably the most prolific of all of his mints. Mithridates is a great Hellenistic king to collect, especially for beginners. He produced a lot of coins, they're super common, there's a wide range of different designs to collect, and they're not expensive, even in high grade. Okay, enough with the Greeks, now let's head into Imperial Rome for our next piece. This is yet another brass coin, but this time it's a much larger sestertius, issued under Emperor Antoninus Pius in the 2nd century AD. Rome adopted the use of brass in some of its larger base metal fractions, the sestertius and the dupondius. These were worth 4 and 2 asses, respectively. Smaller fractions like the single ass or the fractions of the ass were generally made with pure copper, which was a much cheaper metal. Well, it's not like brass was much more expensive. This was still a mostly fiduciary coin. Despite its very considerable weight of 26 grams, the metal in this coin was still worth a fraction of its equivalent value in silver. A sestertius was a quarter of a denarius, so that would be around 0.8 grams of silver. 0.5 grams of fine silver if we consider the purity of the denarius at the time of this coin. And half a gram of silver back then had real purchasing power. Definitely more purchasing power than 26 grams of some fancy bronze alloy. So, its design. What do we have here? Lovely bust of Antoninus looking to the right. There's a fair bit of wear on the highest part of this image because, as I said earlier, people tended to spend base metal coins before spending denarius, for example, but still, we can see from the area close to the outline of his head, the area most protected from wear, that this portrait originally had much more detail if compared to one of the small denarius. His flocks of hair show a lot more strands. The area around his face, we can clearly make out the pupils on his eyes, the separation between his lips and the beard, and we can still discern some details on the beard itself. The legends are also in fairly great shape, and there's a lot of detail here. At least the obverse of this coin was very well struck. It reads, Antoninus Augustus Pius, Pater Patriae, Tribunicia Potestate, Consul Tertium. However, on the reverse, well, that's a bit of a disappointment, isn't it? We have a much less visible image. We have two issues here, in fact, with this coin that often show up in base metal alloys. First, there's this granularity on the surfaces. After all, copper is a much more reactive metal to the environment if compared to gold and silver. So there was some sort of environmental corrosion done to the surface. It's a shame, but that's just part of the nature of collecting bronzes. Apart from the corrosion, there's another problem in this coin, and it has to do with the manufacture. It's something other sestertii from that time period have in common. It is a tendency of the reverses having much weaker strikes compared to the obverse. I'm not sure exactly what caused this, but my two theories have to do with either the fact the reverse die being the moving die, that is, the die that mint workers held in place with their hands above the anvil when the coin was struck. And probably this means, it was a little bit precarious the way they handled it, so it didn't fully transfer the force of their hammer blow onto the coin when it was made. And since the obverse of the coin was generally attached to the anvil, it always received the full force of the strike, so that's why the obverses are generally so well. Or, alternatively, it could be simply that the reverse dice used to make this coin, maybe they were starting to be used for a bit longer than they should, because with every strike the die would lose more and more resolution in the negative image it had. Let's remember, after all, that's metal banging against metal. Every hammer blow damaged the die a little bit, and even if the metal on the die was harder than the metal on the coin, so every thousands of strikes you would have to discard the die and bring a brand new one, so maybe this one was used a little bit longer than it should. But in any ways, by looking closely, we can still identify the design. I'll add a drawing to help you visualize it. Here we have Salus, the goddess of health and well-being, very common on coins, wishing the emperor lived a long and healthy life. And around the outer edge of the design, we have the legends, Designatio Quator, meaning the year that coin was made. Antoninus was assured that in the following year he would be consul, and since it's Quator, 4, he would be consul for the 4th time. It's interesting, you often see the legend Cos, which celebrates the number of times an emperor already served as consul. But this one is unique. It mentions something that is going to happen in the future, the fact that the emperor will be consul again. Well, now the use of Salus makes even more sense. They wanted Antoninus to be in good health so he could do his 4th term as consul, he could do his job properly. Alright, next coin, and I'm particularly excited about owning this one. It's another sestertius, and this time it was issued for Marcus Aurelius, but this is another posthumous coin. This piece was issued in 180 AD, after his death at just 58 years of age. Marcus seemed to have been relatively frail throughout his life. There are many records mentioning him being ill, and sadly, this might have been the cause of his relatively early death. This coin marks the end of the Pax Romana. It's a coin with a sad vibe, I would say. In a way, that's one of the reasons I purchased this coin. It was issued right at the beginning of the reign of Commodus, and it circulated probably during some pretty rough years for the Romans. I like imagining what someone holding this coin back then must have felt. When I did this thought experiment, what immediately came to my mind was the image of an older man, maybe in his 50s, and he would certainly remember the much better years of Marcus's early reign, or even better, the years of peace and prosperity under Antoninus Pius, during maybe his childhood. So I couldn't help but imagine this old man looking at this coin and thinking, oh, times were better back then. Oh, Marcus, we needed you now, but you're gone. What are we gonna do? As for the coin itself, as we can see, this one is in much better shape compared to the previous one. Don't you agree? There's certainly some wear on the high parts of the coin. His ear and a little bit of his facial hair have been worn away, but this is a coin with much better metal quality, much less corrosion has happened, and we can still see a lot of details. We can even see some small details that would have been worn away if this coin circulated more. Notice there are even some little tiny points on the legends, separating the words, so people knew where one word ended and another began. So it reads, Divus, as they would say, Divus dot Marcus dot Antoninus dot Pius. On the reverse, once again, we have a little bit more wear. This might be another case of a reverse die in slightly worse shape than the obverse die. So here Marcus is being carried away to the afterlife. He's riding this huge eagle sent by Jupiter, the king of the gods, to pick him up after his deification ceremony. We can even see him waving us goodbye with his raised hand. That's such a sad coin. And finally, around the legends, a simple consecratio, consecrated, stating Marcus had been deified. Wow, I love this coin. It's a coin that illustrates the end of the golden age of Rome. I mean, no one who held that coin knew they were entering such a dark period. We know this now, but still, knowing this coin was made right before things took such a turn to the worse gives this coin an inexplicable significance to me. And finally, let's wrap this up with a dupondius. The dupondius was worth 2 asses. And to differentiate this denomination from the simple ass, they also made it out of this brass alloy. In fact, the Romans called it orichalcum. So, to differentiate these, a single ass being made out of copper would have had a deep red, coppery hue to it, while this brass coin probably looked yellowish. Nowadays, it's a bit hard to distinguish one from the other because there's a layer of patina over most coins, and both asses and dupondi generally weight around the same, but there are a couple of ways to quickly tell these denominations apart. The portrait on the dupondius generally has the emperor wearing a radiate crown, but when there are no laurel or radiate crowns, like in this example of a coin which features an empress, you can still make out a dupondius by looking at its rims, at its edges. An ass has a thin edge. The rims are thinner than the central part of the flan, while a dupondius has this square edge. An easy way to understand this is like if you sliced a thick piece of salami. The rings are as thick as the rest of the slice, so a dupondius has this shape. The ass is more like the traditional shape of a flying saucer. I know it's probably the first time you hear flying saucer and salami in the same sentence, but it's a surprisingly accurate way of describing these shapes. And we have an empress here. Who is this beautiful lady? This was a coin struck between 180 and 182 for Crispina. Crispina was the wife of Emperor Commodus. Poor little girl was one of the many victims of Commodus. After 10 years of being unable to produce an heir to the emperor, she was banished from Rome under charges of adultery and quietly put to death when she was out of the public eye, at just 27 years of age. Pretty standard portrait for an empress. She wears this nice hairdo that tightly tied her hair behind her head in these braids, and we have some simple legends. Crispina Augusta. These are also quite straightforward because, of course, as a woman, she didn't hold any official titles other than being the emperor's wife. And as we go for the reverse, oh boy, that doesn't look good, does it? Thankfully, we have the drawings here to make sense of what's going on at this side, but I wanted to have the opportunity to show you that ugly side of bronze coins, to show you that, well, that's one of the things that happens when you collect bronzes. As I said previously, it's a much more reactive metal, and sometimes a coin is just unlucky. In this case, this coin must have been in some sort of container that protected the obverse really well, but exposed the reverse a lot more to the elements, resulting in this contrast, in this mess we have here in this reverse. And that's just part of the hobby, man. Unless you want to spend some considerable sum of money in one of the very rare base metal coins with pristine metal on the obverse and reverse, you might just have to get used to this kind of issue in brass and bronze coins. It's just part of the game, but it's at least my duty to inform you. So let's make some sense of this mess we have here. We have a very uneven green patina. That's why we have this bumpy appearance here, as some parts of the flan develop a thicker mineral layer over other areas, and some parts have different colors. As you can see, there's some streaks of lighter greens at some areas. This probably happened due to small differences in humidity or the kinds of materials the coin was in contact with during the long time it was buried. There are also some rough areas that were likely cleaned out, revealing spots of corrosion. And I mean, this object is 1,800 years old. We're going to have some spots of corrosion when we're that age, you know? The image we have here is that of Juno Lucina, Juno the bringer of light. Juno was the goddess of marriage and childbirth, and since you know Crispina met her end after failing to give Commodus a son, now we can see why they picked this reverse. This was probably a plead to the goddess to bless Crispina with child. Putting gods on coins was often considered a display of piety on the part of the state towards a certain god, so this was a way of earning favor with the gods. For example, when an emperor went on a journey, you could see gods that represented safe returns and good fate, and here we have a request for a successful pregnancy. But sadly, it seems like Juno was not willing to give any attention to Crispina's pleas. Quite a sad reverse, unfortunately. And here we have it, a nice little compilation of bronze Greek and Roman coins. Have you been adding some bronze coins to your collection recently? I would love to read about them in the comment section below. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. Happy collecting, and I'll see you soon. Let me give a special thank you to all of my amazing channel members and Patreons for their generous support. This channel would not be the same without your help. And if you would like to be part of this list, have early access to my videos when they are uploaded to YouTube, and a series of other perks, make sure to check out my Patreon page and my members tab on YouTube. Thank you very much.